Qualcomm, Pat Lawlor, who is specialized in your virtual reality business. So Pat, why don't we start with talk about the session you just participated in on the Spotlight stage.
Sure. So I think everyone can agree that for VR, you want a mobile experience. You want it to be untethered. So the idea of being wired and connected to anything in the future, it's not going to be what's going to happen. Tangled in your wires. You want freedom to move, and you want to use your VR device in other rooms. So one thing we talked about was a lot about the VR experience being mobile, and then what does it take to be mobile? All the processing requirements that are required to do that, on-device processing, basically convincing your mind that you're in this virtual reality space. So all the visual requirements, the audio requirements, the interaction requirements, and then doing that in this mobile device. How do you do it at low power? So a lot of it is around that, and then in addition, the connectivity requirements. So you're going to need a lot of new data. It's going to be bigger data, higher resolution, 3 CPUs, HDR, stereoscopic. So I mean and then just lots of people using it. So it's going to be a lot of bandwidth required.
So a lot of people talk about compute storage and the network. Talk about where Qualcomm is going to play in those areas with respect to VR.
So definitely in the compute, definitely in the connectivity aspect. Yeah. I mean, we're big players in that already, and we like it. We like that VR is a driver both for compute, but it's also a driver for 4G, 5G, and those technologies. You're going to need a lot more connectivity. You're going to need low latency, but at the same time, you always need on-device processing. It's going to be the solution that makes things efficient, and when you don't necessarily have the best network coverage. So you're going to need both. It will be complementary.
So where do you see some of the, and I know you look at this every day, but what are some of the most exciting things that you're seeing in VR today?
Yeah, so I'm just excited about VR and the potential. I think once you understand VR and feel the power of presence and being transported to anything, then you start to, anything you imagine, how you work, how you play, anything you do could become a VR. I mean, I'm a big sports fan, so for me, just sports and having that best seat in the house, to me, is a great experience. Like, I can't afford to go to the Super Bowl, but in VR, I'll be able to sit anywhere in that stadium. And one thing that's exciting, which isn't here yet, is the idea of 6 degrees of freedom video. So rather than just having that one seat at halftime, I could then, if someone makes a 6 degrees of freedom, I'll be able to move anywhere in the stadium I want. I could go on the field and get close to the players. So to me, when that happens, that'll be pretty cool.
Talk a bit about Qualcomm's technology for VR.
Sure, yeah, so we've been working on VR, the underlying VR technologies for a long time. And a lot of the things that we've learned from doing smartphones are very applicable. And so, if you're not that aware, I mean, so the Snapdragon is our main product, and Snapdragon 820 was really designed, certainly for smartphones, but with the idea that we'd want to use it for VR as well. And so it's not just hardware, though. I think that's the big thing. There's so much of software that's required because VR is so heavy on the computing, but it's also very heavy on the latency. Getting things very quickly to update on the screen so you don't get motion sickness and things like that.
Right.
So on how do you integrate and do these things at low power, everything that happens. Because if you talk about like just the visual processing of motion to photon, you have sensor processing just to know where your head is looking. You then need to update the visual part of whether it's graphics or video. And then you need to put it on the display. And you need to kind of warp it and put it in the right spot. You need to correct for lenses. So you need to do all this in a very short amount of time. And I think really what Qualcomm has focused on is understanding all these requirements, making these tasks and putting them on the right blocks or engines. So for example, the sensor processing we do on a DSP, all the graphics we do on the GPU, we do on a video decode engine. So it's doing these things at low power and then finding out how can I do shortcuts to actually get the content there so the latency's short. And besides that, so the Snapdragon, we also are helping developers with this VR SDK. And then most recently, we introduced a VR reference design. So we've have all the plastics, all the hardware, all the sensors, and with this reference design, OEMs can take this design, get to market really quickly.
So you mentioned the SDK and what in the past year attending a lot of developer conferences, you're seeing the proliferation of these developer toolkits.
Right.
that are finding themselves in the hands of the builders and the makers and the do-it-yourselfers. Talk a little bit about your go-to-market strategy with the VR product as it relates to the developer community and the SDKs and potentially even those reference stacks.
Yeah, so definitely, since VR is such a new platform and content,
Yep.
people need to figure out just how to do it, both in VR video and then in gaming. So really, I think we're learning from what other people as well. So certainly we look at the different APIs that like Google and Facebook would introduce, and we try to figure out what are developers really having trouble with and what don't they really need to focus on. For example, the motion to photon path, they don't really have to understand all the requirements of sensor processing and quickly routing things through and doing single buffering to shorten latency. We give them a simple API, and we just do all the work underneath the cover. So we really tried to hide a lot of the work,
Right.
and I think we're really trying to enable the market. In terms of the actual content production, I think other people are better served at that, but we're looking at what developers want and trying to simplify it for them to get it to market, performance and power.
Is there a toolkit, kind of a Snapdragon VR toolkit that's out there that a maker or builder could buy and experiment with? Or is the go-to-market really limited to OEM channels or ODM channels who might be taking the technology and embedding it in an existing product?
Yeah, so our main path to market, high volume path to market would be, this reference design that an OEM will take. And, a developer, like a software developer, would use the SDK.
Right.
And then I'd say like a hobbyist would probably do more of a cardboard sort of application where they'll take the phone that they like and then put it in some sort of holder, which is also a great experience.
Yeah. So how about you talk about that you're not in the content business per se, but let's say I'm in the content business or I'm in the game development business. How would I engage with Qualcomm on this VR product?
Yeah, so definitely if you want to engage with us, it's called the Snapdragon VR SDK. You go and you can download that, and that's the best way to interact with us. We have a developer email, you can email on forums and things like that. And definitely if you make good content, people will show up, because right now content is something people are looking to figure out what is that best content, how to make it, and that's where I think there's going to be a lot of future creativity going on.
Pat, thanks for your time. You
No,
mentioned
thank you.
that VR, the experience around VR is going to have to rely on not only compute on the device, but also the bandwidth. What types of things can Qualcomm do to optimize that real-time bandwidth need for a operator? Because if you don't optimize it, you're talking about a thick stream of video content or data that could really bring down a mobile network.
Yes. So definitely, as VR moves to higher quality content, like as we mentioned, it's going to be high resolution, stereoscopic. It's going to have HDR. So all these things are going on, and it's going to have to be very efficient. There's going to be different ways of encoding the data and to do it smartly. So rather than necessarily looking at your full 360 view, maybe you send your pose and your head pose into the cloud, and you send a more optimized view for where you're actually looking, and then in the other portions, lower resolution, things like that. But definitely at Qualcomm, we're working on, how can we interact with the cloud to do smarter things, and then obviously optimizing the wireless connectivity, whether it's advanced 4G technologies and small cells, technologies for 5G that will improve bandwidth as we look at millimeter wave and things like that, and definitely lower latencies.
I think latency is going to be key. If I'm a gamer and I'm in a multi-party experience, I don't want to be the last shooter at a shootout.
Yeah, latency is important always in gaming. VR, any gaming, you want the interactions as fast as possible.
So do you see the actual mobile phone becoming the gaming device?
It will be one device. So I think in general there are different categories of what people want. The mass market device, I truly believe, will be a mobile device. People want to use, as we've seen with our smartphones, people want devices that they can carry with them. They can use it when they want, where they want, and so I think it's going to be a mobile device that will be the volume device.